I do have a sponsor in today's video, but more on that shortly. Baldur's Gate 3 took over the industry last year, being the first game ever to win Game of the Year at the 5 major Game of the Year ceremonies. It also managed to get into Steam's top 10 list of most played games of all time just 10 days after its initial release, and reviews across the board from critics and regular players alike are overwhelmingly positive. Not only was Baldur's Gate 3 a huge success numbers-wise, the independent studio behind this game, Larian Studios, had become a great modern-day example of what gamers want to see studios become. But believe me, it didn't just happen overnight. Larian has a long, I'd say very interesting history of success, failure, and almost complete destruction a few times. I think that this is a very important story to share, so come on in, grab a table, and let's have a chat about a studio that rose from the ashes to ultimately become what many would consider one of the greatest studios of all time. The f*** are you looking at? Larian Studios was formed in 1996 in a small office in Ghent, Belgium by none other than Swen Vincke, whom 28 years later is still the owner, CEO, and creative director. Sven was born in 1972 in De Pan, a Belgian town on the North Sea, to parents that were restaurateurs of a small establishment on the coast. At a very early age, Sven became a fan of video games, and he would take this passion all the way to Ghent University, graduating with a degree in computer science. I actually read in a few places that Sven was initially interested in studying speech recognition, but due to seeing how much fun people were having with his gaming projects, he decided to devote himself to making video games. Hallelujah. Yeah. But speaking of making video games, let's take a moment and welcome a very relevant video sponsor, Boot.dev. According to StackOverflow.com, the median salary for back-end web developers in 2023 was in the 6 figures, with many of these jobs also being remote. If that sounds good to you, Boot.dev is here to help with its online, self-paced courses that are designed to feel like a captivating RPG. Now, Boot.dev allows you to learn back-end web development from start to finish in the Python and Go programming languages. Take a look at all the valuable courses here, and even though the earning potential is high, this is not a get-rich-quick scheme. These courses are deep, and they are designed for you to take your time to learn the fundamentals so that you're truly ready for that job search, of which they even have courses for finding a programming job. Boot.dev has also been designed from the ground up with the problem of e-learning boredom already being taken into account, which is why you'll be earning XP. There's quests, achievements, levels, and even global leaderboards. With this platform, you'll be getting your hands on the keyboard, writing a ton of code in a fun way, and also shipping projects, as this is the only way to really learn. So click the link in the description box and use my code WolfheartFPS to get 25% off your first payment for Boot.dev. That's 25% off your first month or your first year, depending on the subscription that you choose. There's also free demos for all the courses and a 30-day no questions asked money back guarantee. Back to the video. At the young age of just 24, Sven founded Larian Studios, of which the name was inspired by Sven's dog at the time named Lar, not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but the name of the studio is quite wholesome. One of Larian's first ever projects became known as The Lady, the Mage, and the Knight, which was meant to be an RPG inspired by Ultima 7, where you control 3 characters and can play the game in multiplayer. Larian, however, was having a really hard time signing it with a publisher, and funds were running pretty thin. Atari actually took interest in this game, but Atari would soon after step away from PC games, so that didn't really work out. But the game was eventually signed to Attic Entertainment Software, the publishers of the Realms of Arcania games. Instead of this being a blessing, though, it turned out to be a curse, and The Lady, the Mage, and the Knight was ultimately canceled in 1999. According to Sven in a PC Gamer interview from 2018, Attic demanded a lot, but didn't have the money to fund this increasingly ambitious game. At one point, they even made Larian throw out everything because their game was in 8-bit, and Attic was panicking as Diablo 2 was 16-bit. Sven would end up finding himself responsible for a team of 30 people, including some of the publisher's employees who had been sent over but were no longer being paid or being sent back. Interestingly enough, you can actually find a forum post from Larian way back in 2001, where Larian shares an email from 1999 that highlights some of the serious financial problems involved with this project from the perspective of, I believe, a dev sent over by, I'm assuming, Attic Entertainment to work alongside Larian. Now, this forum post was created by Larian to dispel rumors that were circulating around that Larian dumped the game due to their own greed. The concern has been voiced that due to the articles in both PC Games and PC Player of this month, fans of LMK, Lady, Mage, and the Knight, would think that we, Larian Studios, just dumped LMK because we were greedy. Well, we were very hungry, but greedy? We've long been silent about the entire thing, but in the recent months there have been quite a lot of rumors which were saying that we're responsible for the entire catastrophe that was LMK. To once and for all end these rumors, here's an email which was sent by Marion to some of his colleagues at Virgin Lands. They were creating the cutscenes for LMK, at the time that the decision was made to cancel LMK. It basically contains the entire sad story and can be backed by the entire team. Additionally, as further supported for our version, Blank, I'm assuming this is Attic Entertainment or the owner of Attic, was recently ordered by a German judge to pay debts mentioned in the email. The email is actually a pretty interesting read, but due to translation errors and my lack of general details on the situation as a whole, I can't really fully grasp what's going on. It does appear, though, that Attic was not financially taking care of some of the developers, particularly the ones in this email who were hired for cutscenes for the game and sent to Belgium to assist Larian. It also appears as if Attic may have been found to be engaging in perhaps some shady activities. It's hard to fully understand, so don't quote me on any of this, but this all eventually led to Larian completely opposing further cooperation with Attic, which of course then led to the cancelization of the game. Certainly off to an interesting start with publishers here. So yeah, really rough start for Larian here, but with that said, during these early days, Larian was also working on another game of which became their first ever released game in 1997 called the L.E.D Wars, which launched on Windows. Swen was the project manager and also the lead programmer, and I think it's important to highlight some of Sven's roles in a few of these games, as it does give you some insight as to how beneficial it can be to have the head honcho at a studio actually being someone who fully understands their products from the ground up. The L.E.D Wars was a futuristic real-time strategy game that some say is one of the hardest RTS games to date. It takes place in the 21st century, where different armies fight against each other in an attempt to get a hold of a life evolution drug. Interestingly and ironically enough, the game's main selling point is said to be the advance of artificial intelligence. Hello, ChatGPT. RTS was quite popular at the time, and it was cheaper and easier to make than most RPGs. And from what I read, although I can't fully confirm this, it sounds like it took Larian only around half a year or maybe even a little less to develop. Larian was able to get this game out in 1997 with publisher Ionos, but it's hard to really tell how it turned out for Larian. In 1999, Larian would start working on their first ever released Divinity game, which was actually based on the canceled project The Lady, the Mage, and the Knight. Divine Divinity released in 2002, the same year as Morrowind, for Windows, and it was published by CDV Software. It was an action role-playing game where you control only one character, and it was partially inspired by Diablo with a top-down camera angle, but unlike Diablo 1 and 2, Larian went much more in the RPG direction, as Divine Divinity contained branching dialogues, non-combat skills such as lockpicking and bartering, and a reputation and disposition system.
On the first day, all was quiet.
Divine Divinity has several point-and-click elements to it, and this is where you really start to see evidence of Larian being all about manipulating items in the environment in their games, such as moving a barrel to find a key underneath or clicking on a bale of hay to provide a resting spot. The skill and attribute system is also very open-ended in this game, allowing characters of any starting class to choose any skill or attribute increase. This would become a staple of Divinity games. Divine Divinity is also, of course, a big part of the establishment of Divinity lore, as the game takes place in the era of Chaos, which is long after Divinity Original Sin 1, but predates Divinity Original Sin 2 on the lore timeline by only a couple decades. According to Metacritic, the game received generally favorable reviews, although it did have quite a buggy launch. Now, interesting piece of information here. Swen said that Larian didn't even know that the publisher was releasing the game. I discovered that Divinity was being released when I was doing a press tour for it in the US. We were horribly late with it, at least by a year, but we still needed some time to polish it. IGN actually put out a rather positive review, but I wanted to share a few lines from it. It lacks anything memorable, like the party NPCs with minds and dialogue of their own in Baldur's Gate 2. And with BioWare's assets tied up in lightsabers and Black Isle Studios working on a game that has no strategic pause mode, perhaps Larian will step forward to carry the CRPG banner in the near future. It's funny to look back at a few of these statements now with Baldur's Gate 3 being out. Divine Divinity was nominated for a few of the best role-playing game awards, but ended up losing to Morrowind and Neverwinter Nights. And despite generally positive reviews and seemingly good sales, the contract agreement between Larian's publisher meant that Larian did not earn any money from the game. as it was apparently not commercially successful enough. Swen said in a 2018 PC Gamer article, "We were so excited about signing back in 1999 that we didn't really pay attention to the fact that we should earn money when a game is sold, so we didn't earn anything from Divinity. It was a standard contract back in the day, but if you didn't sell millions of your game under the royalties model, it was very hard to earn any money out of it." So Larian just released a seemingly successful and positively reviewed game, yet they found themselves broke again. As Swen stated, this was in the contract with the publisher, so I'd say from my rather ignorant perspective that this appears to be a mix between publisher greed and taking advantage of studios, and also Swen and his team not fully understanding and or grasping the contract or the consequences of said contract that they got themselves into. Just look at this kitty to make you a little bit happier. Larian went from 30 people to just 3 by 2003, 5 months after Divine Divinity launched. Swen said that this was a dark time, and he would end up taking a 2-week break to South Africa, where his father lived at the time, and he said that he would just sit there on the ranch staring out, trying to figure out what to do. When Swen made it back to Belgium, he convinced a bank and a Belgian broadcaster to give him a little money to create what would become Ketnet Kick. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Ketnet Kick was a big 3D game in which children were able to make creations such as animations, movies, and cartoons, and the broadcaster would then basically use it in a TV show and say which kid made it. In a way, it was like American Idol for kids in the 3D world. Ketnet Kick was of course not what Swen wanted Larian to be doing, but this funding would allow them to make a sequel to Divine Divinity called Beyond Divinity, which would release in 2004 for Windows. Beyond Divinity takes place 20 years after the original game and added the ability for the player to control 2 characters, each with their own stats and equipment. According to Metacritic, Beyond Divinity received average reviews. Beyond Divinity did, however, contribute alongside Ketnet Kick and some other work-for-hire projects, and giving Larian a sufficient budget to make what they hoped was going to be a AAA action RPG where you could turn into a dragon and do all sorts of great stuff.
Divinity II Ego Draconis will be in stores fall 2009.
This game would be called Divinity II Ego Draconis, and it would take place in 1300 AD, several decades after DOS 2. One of the defining features of this game was the ability to switch between traditional third-person action combat with your character and aerial combat as a dragon. It had a strong narrative, and it used traditional RPG elements such as branching narratives, combined with RPG elements that you may see in some ARPGs like Diablo. Larian's team grew to around 25 people at this time, and Ego Draconis was going to be Larian's break into the console market, as the game was planned for not only Windows but also Xbox 360. Larian did sign with a publisher for this game, DTP Entertainment, and also signed back with CDV Software for their USA audience. Larian's history with publishers up to now hasn't been too great for them, and you guessed it, the streak would continue. Swen said that Larian tried to reach for the sky with this game, but at some point the publishers decided that the game had to be released, and once again, it was a game that released before it was ready. Swen said it was really painful, but this was during the financial crisis of 2009, and a lot of the publishers were under pressure. They got into financial difficulties and went bankrupt eventually, and we were dragged into that. Ego Draconis left Larian in a lot of debt, and their future was kind of, not really guaranteed. Larian was only just getting by now, and in 2010, Swen managed to get the rights to make a new version of Divinity II called the Dragon Knight Saga. This updated version of Ego Draconis, which includes an expansion, was sold to the first publisher that Larian remembers as being one that treated them well, and this publisher was none other than Focus Home Interactive. Many of the larger publishers in the industry would actually tell Larian that they had no future, so Larian was always dealing with small to mid-sized publishers up to this point. The Dragon Knight Saga reviewed better than Ego Draconis, and it seemed like the game turned out to be fairly successful, although it's hard to come across any concrete numbers. Even with that positive collaboration, though, with Focus, Larian started thinking really seriously about publishing games on their own and going independent. They wanted to be independent for more than just publishing, though, and Swen managed to attract 2 venture capitalists for 2 of their planned upcoming games, and the profits from the Dragon Knight Saga, plus work-for-hire projects and the help from these venture capitalists, allowed Larian to have the resources to not only develop these 2 upcoming games free from a publisher, but they were also able to start developing these games on their own game engine, free from a publisher and free from the restraints of a game engine that might not always allow them to do what they want to do for their games. Divinity Dragon Commander released in 2013 for Windows, and it took place thousands of years before the other Divinity games in the lore timeline.
Larian Studios presents Divinity Dragon Commander.
This is an interesting game to say the least, as you take control of a huge dragon, but the game combines RTS with action combat and even political simulation where you make decisions in conversation with NPCs that affect the gameplay. Reviews were fairly positive overall. I see a lot around the 3 to 4 star area or 7 out of 10ish, but this was not meant to be Larian's crown jewel at the time. Larian was working on another game, a game that would truly begin Larian's ascension to get to where they're at today. And this game is none other than Divinity Original Sin. Divinity Original Sin was the game that Swen had been trying to make for the past decade, but due to cancelizations and dropped features, he had not been able to realize his dream yet. The dream of making a party-based multiplayer RPG inspired by Ultima, but for this game, he would actually have Larian venture into the turn-based tactical combat genre. Swen did everything he could to make this game happen, including launching Larian's first ever Kickstarter campaign.
Your project has launched. It is now live on Kickstarter. Yes, I am extremely nervous. Extremely nervous.
With the first goal being $400,000, which would make Divinity Original Sin a bigger, more reactive, and more dense game world. This Kickstarter would end up raising over $944,000, though, just shy of their highest stretch goal of $1 million, which would have added a day and night cycle to the game. Larian also opened up Divinity Original Sin to early access, which I believe was priced at $40 on Steam. And early access gave participants access to an early, unfinished part of the game, and of course participants would get the full game on release. This early access period allowed Larian to collect an abundance of critical data to help in developing the foundations of this highly reactive CRPG. Early access is certainly an interesting topic to discuss though, and many studios have used early access in rather malicious ways, but after seeing Larian make use of it with both of their Divinity games and also BG3, I think they are a rare but great example of early access being used in a way that's a net positive for everyone. Even with early access, investments, and the Kickstarter though, things were still tight. This was a really ambitious game, and the launch day was hurtling towards Larian quicker than anticipated. Swen actually stopped paying VAT just to try to keep development going for an extra month, as the one bank in the entire country that was willing to loan money to Larian decided not to extend the loan. And VAT, or VAT for those unaware, is a consumption tax assessed on the value added in each production stage of a good or service. It's a tax. And it was reported that in a talk in GDC in 2015, Swen revealed that Larian had 1.5 million euros for the game, but ended up spending 4.5 million on it. All of this, however, would pay off, as Divinity Original Sin, the first one, had its full release in 2014, 1 year after Dragon Commander, and it sold over 500,000 copies within just a few months, making this Larian's fastest selling game ever. If you're curious as to how much DOS 1 sold in total, well, back in a 2019 GDC conference talk, Swen revealed that DOS 1 had sold 2.5 million copies by that time. And the greatest thing about this is that Larian was able to realize their own profits with this success, as before they were always in a weak negotiation position with publishers, and they never got good deals. Swen even said in the past that we were the beggars of Belgium. It was really tough financing game development, so once we managed to get that break with the Dragon Knight Saga, and then Dragon Commander and Original Sin, it made a big difference. Larian was no longer a company that was just surviving. They were thriving. 1 year and a few months after Divinity 1's release date, Larian launched an enhanced edition of the game, which improved things, added many things such as dual wielding, and expanded and revised story content, and much, much more. And the enhanced edition introduced the game to consoles, which of course furthered sales, but perhaps even more importantly, brought in a new audience to what many would say is the CRPG genre of games, which is traditionally played on PCs. Reviews for DOS 1 were very positive on Steam, and on Metacritic it received an 87 critic score and an 8.6 user score. The game won GameSpot's PC Game of the Year, and Larian, with their enhanced edition of the game, showed that if you support them, they will continue to give it back. People were starting to catch on to this studio and their studio philosophies, and Larian was certainly onto something here with this rather unique game, and they knew it. big turning point for the studio. While the development team for Divinity Original Sin 1 reached around 35 to 40 devs, Larian's next game, Divinity Original Sin 2, which would take place long in the future from the first game, would bring that number up to around 130 by the end of the project. Larian also went from one single studio in Ghent, Belgium, to expanding to 4 international studios, all working on the same game. With that growth, though, of course, came challenge, and even with Larian finally feeling like they had sufficient resources to do everything well, they still found themselves scrambling at times. DOS 2 fundamentally was similar to DOS 1. Isometric camera angle, party-based where you control a party of up to 4, lots of player agency and creative freedom, especially with the environment and items, tactical turn-based combat, and a very open skill system. While DOS 1 was a great success, Larian still didn't feel like they were able to do everything that they wanted to do with that game. Well, DOS 2 would take the DOS 1 formula to the next level. Larian once again launched a Kickstarter for the game where it reached every single stretch goal, raising over $2 million.
People are applauding behind me, so I can only assume that that means that we have $2 million. I'm seeing it only on the stream, so I'm a little bit late here to the party. Thank you very much, people. It has been a tremendous and fantastic Kickstarter campaign. We just hit $2 million on the Kickstarter page.
Larian had some real hardcore fans after the success of DOS 1. Larian also did an early access period for the game, which started in 2016, which priced the game at around $45, which was also the final price for the game when it launched. Early access lasted for around a year, and like DOS 1, it contained an unfinished early part Act 1 of the game. Larian worked their asses off, and in 2017, Divinity Original Sin 2 released for PC, and around a year later released a definitive edition which also launched the game on Xbox and PlayStation, and a year after that it even came out on Nintendo Switch. So cool. DOS 2 received universal acclaim with overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam, a critic score of 93 on Metacritic with an 8.8 user score. The game was a monumental success for Larian and easily their fastest and best-selling game up to that point. On Steam, it reached an all-time peak of over 93,000 concurrent players, and in 2023, Sven revealed that DOS 2 sold around 3 times as many copies as DOS 1, which would put DOS 2 in the 7.5+ million range. For an independent studio that is making games that fall into the rather niche CRPG category of game genre, these are incredible numbers. The game won PC Gamer's Game of the Year award, and Forbes even wrote an article titled Divinity Original Sin 2 is the best reviewed game of the year besides Breath of the Wild. With that said, it didn't actually make the Game Awards nominations, likely due to it still being a rather niche game and genre. Larian showed us with DOS 2 that they are willing to always be seeking to improve themselves and take their games to the next level. And this brings us into the Baldur's Gate 3 era, of which Larian was actually denied the license to work on this game in the past. I've already gone over the full development of BG3 in a separate video. I'll leave a link to that below. But long story short, Baldur's Gate 3 took the DOS 2 formula and stuck steroids into its glutes. This game was estimated to have had a budget of at least $100 million, but I wouldn't be surprised if that number hit 150 to 200 plus. Everything that Larian had learned in the past came together to form this game. And Larian grew from 130 to 150-ish devs all the way up to around 500 employees over the course of this game's development to now. And Larian also popped up a few new studios, totaling 7 now, and they even opened up their Warsaw studio recently amidst all these industry layoffs. The build up to Baldur's Gate 3 with its early access period alongside Larian's Panel from Hell shows was like no other, and Larian would continue to show that they are a by gamers, for gamers studio, something that unfortunately can feel a bit rare these days. Sven said in a GameSpot interview around 5 months ago or so that Baldur's Gate 3 at that time had sold almost double what DOS 2 had sold, which would put BG3 around the 15 million mark at that time if previous statements about the Divinity games sales were correct. Baldur's Gate 3 has only been out for a little more than a year, and the game is still reaching daily Steam peaks of 80 to 115k concurrent players. And keep in mind, we still have official mod support coming with patch 7, crossplay at some point, and perhaps even a definitive edition one day. Who knows? This game was a monumental success, not only for Larian, but also for us gamers, as Larian showed the entire industry that being a greedy motherfucker and developing games that are meant to manipulate gamers into spending more money versus developing games that gamers are going to genuinely enjoy playing with their valuable limited time left on this planet, is not the way. We don't want out-of-touch Bobby Kotick's at the head of our game companies. We want leaders who truly understand their product, video games, and who place quality at the very least somewhat close to profit in the hierarchy of studio wants and needs. Hope you all enjoyed this look back at Larian's history, and I hope it makes much more sense now as to why and how Larian got to where they're at today. Persistence, knowledge, defiance in the face of greed, as I'm sure Larian could have sold out many times in the past, and most importantly, passion for what they do. Thank you to Boot.dev for sponsoring this video, and be on the lookout for more news on the future of Larian and their 2 upcoming RPGs right here on this channel. I'll catch you on the next one. Oh, and one more thing, follow me on Twitch if you like live streams. I do stream also on YouTube, but my Twitch channel's looking quite pathetic right now compared to my YouTube. Thank you guys.